As I walk through the shadow of the Valley of Doom. This is Sega Masters. The Master System's critical holiday season of 1988 has been hit or miss to say the least, but thankfully we have some strong titles to finish the year off. We're looking at one of them in today's episode, Golvellius, Valley of Doom, an action-adventure romp that serves as a rare attempt by Sega to show how their console wasn't just about mediocre to bad arcade conversions. And you might notice the name Compile on the copyright line. We've seen them pop up quite a few times during the course of this series. They'll have a hand in all three remaining Master System carts from 1988. A well-illustrated intro that sets the table for this epic adventure starts playing if the game is left on the title screen long enough. We're taken to the once peaceful kingdom of Alid, which is under duress due to a plague of demons and monsters in a nearby valley that's keeping the locals from attaining water. And the stress stemming from this problem apparently causes the king to fall seriously ill. Since the only cure to his ailment is a rare herb that just happens to only be found in the aforementioned valley, the king's daughter, Rena, rashly heads off to find the herb herself, but unsurprisingly ends up captured by an ancient demonic ruler known only as Golvellius and hidden somewhere in the monster-infested land. So much like Captain Silver last episode, it's the main villain who gets top billing in this cart. You play as Golvellius, a wandering adventurer who just happens to be in the neighborhood when this all went down, and he decides to brave the so-called Valley of Doom to rescue Rena and slay Golvellius. And this whole setup does feel like Sega trying to copy a competitor's classic, at least in part. Most of the talk of the late 1980s video game revival centered around Nintendo's original Legend of Zelda cartridge, which opened more than a few eyes upon its North American debut in 1987. Console gamers were treated to a whole new experience with features that only previously appeared in complex computer RPGs, such as a non-linear quest, a large world to explore with dungeons to conquer and secrets to uncover, shops that sold important power-ups and upgrades, and so forth, while also offering plenty of arcade-style monster slaying. Needless to say, Shigeru Miyamoto's groundbreaking creation quickly became a beloved classic on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. Of course, anything that successful is bound to breed imitators, so it's not too surprising that other developers and publishers would look to follow in Nintendo's footsteps with similar action-adventure titles of their own. Yet most of them weren't content to just be Xerox jobs. Many of these so-called Zelda clones actually attempted to one-up the original with their own twists and refinements to Miyamoto's magic formula with varying degrees of success. And it wasn't just within the NES ranks. Rival console manufacturers were also hoping to cash in on Zelda's popularity by populating their libraries with their own similar action-adventure titles, hoping to show they could provide the same experiences to what Nintendo was doing. Sega naturally wanted in on the Zelda parade, but admittedly ended up taking something of a shortcut with their initial entry in the top-down adventure genre that wasn't entirely an original creation. Instead, Golvellius actually began life in 1987 on the MSX computer in Japan, courtesy of Compile. Crafted by Pak Fujishima, this title showed how Zelda's influence even reached the realm of computer games, as Golvellius followed a similar pattern of functioning much like Nintendo's masterpiece on the surface, until you run into its unique features, which we will get into. Sega was certainly impressed enough to secure the license to program a conversion for their console, and other than a few graphical enhancements and gameplay tweaks, it's a mostly straightforward port. If you remember, the original Legend of Zelda cart began with you entering the first cave you saw and obtaining your initial weapon from an old man before being set loose on the world, and it's pretty much left up to you on how to go about your journey. Golvellius opens in similar fashion as Zelda as Golvellius enters this first cave and meets this wise old woman who points out a rather obvious fact before presenting him with a sword and some boots to start his mission with. But instead of being sent out to roam an overworld landscape, the game drops you into this arcade-style side-scrolling cavern, wasting little time in showing off the unique touches it adds to the Zelda template. You just charge forward, carving up the snakes, caterpillars, and other hostile creatures in your way, and if anything, this sequence might remind you of certain Zelda sequels that also use side view segments. Oddly enough, the screen only scrolls in a forward direction, and for whatever reason, Khaleesi's can't turn around or even face the other way. You eventually run into this giant snake that serves as a mini-boss but isn't too hard to dispatch, and defeating it will earn you some health refills. After this short stage concludes, you finally reach the overworld to begin your questing in earnest. This card does use an almost identical setup to Zelda as you trek across the landscape screen by screen while defending yourself against the different creatures and monsters that materialize out of nowhere to menace you. Killing your aggressors earns you gold, but no matter how many you eliminate, your foes respawn endlessly until you leave the screen. Also, much like Link's exploits in Hyrule, just about every screen contains a cave entrance for you to descend into. Many of them are inhabited by these fairies, and some of them are willing to give you some helpful information. This one basically tells you that before you can even think about dueling with Golvellius, you must first search for 7 mystical crystals which are hidden throughout the Valley of Doom. Other caves contain old wise women who are ready to sell you essential power-ups, such as these potions to extend your health meter, not unlike Zelda's heart containers or Metroid's energy tanks, as long as you have the money to purchase them. If you're short on cash, you just get a severe tongue lashing and booted out of the cave with nothing. Compile's unofficial mascot, Randar, also puts in an appearance and is willing to refill all your health and potions for a small fee. He can be found in different locations, and you will be seeking his help a lot throughout your travels. Speaking of which, you'll quickly discover that you're initially confined to this 9-screen valley and unable to venture any further. Unlike Zelda, whose entire world is open for you to freely explore right from the start, Golvellius' game world is divided into 7 territories, each of which is isolated from one another until you seek out the demon boss of the region and slay him to obtain one of the 7 crystals. Certain fairies are also willing to give you clues to the special dungeons containing the monster in question. A good amount of the cave entrances are hidden from view and need to be revealed by either slaying enough enemies or striking certain objects a number of times. Once you do locate and enter the passage to the boss's dungeon, the cart switches to one of 2 types of underground segments that are alternated. These dungeons take the form of either side-scrolling caverns just like we saw earlier, or overhead auto-scrolling vertical tunnels where Khaleesi walks forward by himself. Your main task here is to maneuver him around the walls and barriers in your path while cutting down anything that comes his way. Almost like a shoot-'em-up, which Compile was certainly known for around this time. Most of the foes here aren't any real threat. Your main concern is to not get caught behind a barrier and forced off the bottom of the screen. This will cause you to be booted out of the cave back to the surface, requiring you to start your excursion all over from the entrance. These levels also have their own mini-boss, this giant bat who, like the giant snake in the horizontal caves, will shower you with health refills if you successfully knock it out. Regardless of which action sequence you trudge through, the dungeon culminates in a showdown with one of Golvellius' demon underlings. It's your basic boss battle of dodging the projectiles and using the openings to get your licks in. Defeat the boss and your health and money are replenished before you're allowed to leave the cave in triumph. The caveat is you're not immediately bestowed with the crystal as you might expect. All your victory over the boss earns is the opportunity to purchase the crystal, which involves seeking out an open cave that wasn't visible before and buying it from another wise woman, all of which feels like an unnecessary extra step. Regardless, the path to the next region of the Valley of Doom is opened up, allowing you access to all the new surprises it contains. Granted, having a mostly set-in-stone order of exploring each territory and taking on the bosses gives this card a more linear feel than Nintendo's adventure, yet it also guarantees that every conquered area will lead to new things to discover, instead of having most everything offered to you all at once. It's also satisfying to see how your efforts are causing your game world to expand bit by bit, since you can move freely between the areas you've opened up. Plenty of humor and personality is also sprinkled into this quest with the other friendly folk you meet in the caves. Annie here will ask for small donations for a quick health refill, but if you decline the offer, she throws some humorous insults your way as you exit. Not all your allies are helpful though. Many of the fairies you find in the caves just spit out some nonsense that only serves to leave you scratching your head, leaving you wonder why you even bothered with them. A modest selection of new equipment and upgrades can be purchased to make your life easier, such as pendants to boost your defense, stronger swords, shields to ward off projectiles, and even special boots that allow you to walk on water or through the air. In a nice touch, the background music changes with each new sword and shield you acquire. Throughout your adventure, your ears are treated to a wide selection of tunes that may not be as memorable as Zelda's iconic melodies, but are still nicely done for what they are and fit well with your questing, even without any enhancement from the FM sound chip. But where Golvellius really excels are the vibrant visuals that even trump the rather plain yet serviceable graphics of Nintendo's cart. Some excellent use of colors and textures give each of the areas a distinct look, such as the graveyard, swamp, forest, and so forth, and the various terrains do a great job of truly fleshing out the overworld. The in-game character sprites are also clean and well defined, especially the bosses that have some cool designs, and the dungeons sport some nice detailed backgrounds as well. It will take a good handful of hours to reach the final confrontation with Golvellius himself, but there's no battery save. Instead, in true compile fashion, you have to seek out Winky the Wizard in certain locations to obtain a long 32-character password to record your progress. Unfortunately, sloppy translation and a somewhat inconvenient save system are the least of this cart's issues, as a few frustrating rough edges can dampen the fun and enjoyment quite a bit, especially for Zelda vets. Just about all the essentials to complete the game are quite expensive, so much of your time on the surface will be spent camping out on a single screen, hacking away at the endlessly respawning creatures making a beeline for you, which can get a little time consuming before too long. Once you pony up the cash for one important power-up, it's time for more somewhat tedious grinding to replenish your funds for the next pricey upgrade. It doesn't help that you have a maximum amount of gold you can carry at any one time, and the only way to increase your budget cap is to find and purchase larger purses known here as Bibles for whatever reason, adding another expense for you to worry about. It can be just as difficult to find where these important items even are, since the clues you get to their locations are rather vague, so you're often left to just kill a bunch of enemies or attack every object on the screen hoping you stumble upon something. The somewhat flawed combat system can further hamper your relic hunting and monster exterminating. All your fighting has to be done in close quarters, as Kalisa's only weapon throughout his entire quest is his sword, which does have a pretty decent reach, but no secondary arms or magic are available, including any ranged attacks. The simply used controls aren't as responsive as they should be, and you can only move and attack in a northeast-southwest direction. Plus, your blade has to be lined up correctly to deal any damage to your aggressors, who are constantly moving around, so odds are you'll most likely take damage as you attempt to knock your foe out. Though you'll find that if you hold down the attack button instead of instinctively spamming it, your sword strikes are much more effective. While some screens contain choke points you can use to funnel the baddies in your direction for easy carving up, you're especially vulnerable in the wide open areas that offer you little to no cover or anything to shield yourself from the foes as they mercilessly descend on you. On top of that, airborne baddies aren't limited by any movement restrictions. They can basically come at you from countless different angles. Add in the fact that more than a few creepies are quite faster than you, and you can easily find yourself overwhelmed as your health meter is rapidly depleted, causing you to perish before you even know what happened. The two types of dungeons attempt to provide a respite from journeying on the overworld with their mostly straightforward arcade action that contain very little in the way of secrets. The only real puzzles the horizontal caverns contain are usually just striking a statue to open the way forward, or choosing which fork to take when the path splits, since one of the options usually leads to a dead end. As I previously touched on, you can only march forward with no ability to backtrack, And oddly enough, as you progress, it seems like the cave somehow completely disappears behind you, as going off the left side of the screen will boot you back to the overworld. Unfortunately, this becomes necessary if you end up picking the wrong path at a fork and being unable to progress as a result. You're forced to back out through the left side to start the entire cave over in order to hopefully pick the correct route the next time around. Same thing if you end up stuck next to a higher ledge after missing a critical jump on a small platform, which isn't helped with the rather floaty controls during these sequences. Golvellius also gets knocked back quite a bit when an enemy nails him, and can easily get bumped right out of the tunnel. This can get on your nerves in the later dungeons, as one mistake can cost you several minutes of work that you have to retrace, but at least the lack of any time constraints allow you to proceed cautiously through these caverns. You can't say the same thing about the vertical tunnels that also require much trial and error to successfully navigate. Only the automatic scrolling can make these levels feel more unforgiving than their horizontal counterparts. You're again often forced to choose from several paths, and this time you're allowed only a second to make your decision on which road to continue down. Dead ends can appear without warning should you take the wrong fork with nowhere to correct yourself, resulting in quite a few restarts. Golvellius is also not as swift as he is in the side-scrolling dungeons, and often has very little lead time to maneuver around the walls to the path forward, which many times can be clear over on the opposite end of the screen. Just a split-second hesitation can send you back out to the overworld to try this cave again and again until you somehow pull off a perfect run from start to finish. While getting to the bosses can be more difficult than they should be, these underlings aren't actually too hard to take care of. In fact, they can seem pretty easy at times since they all have patterns that are easy to deduce, and it's often a matter of just having enough energy to outlast them as you get in your shots. You can also purchase 2 types of herbs from the wise women that function as emergency health restorers should you run out of energy. I don't mean to sound overly negative about Golvellius. Granted, the card is plagued with flaws that some adventurers may feel are deal breakers, and the marriage of the 3 different gameplay styles isn't a perfect union, but those who stick with this quest will find the positives far outweigh the negatives. Even though this card would have benefited from some polishing up, especially the dungeon segments, you still have a large world to explore with plenty to find, and your journey does become somewhat more manageable as you obtain the upgrades, especially the aqua boots that allow you to stand in bodies of water and safely farm the land-based foes for gold. Once you have the boots that let you walk through the air and the ring that enables you to break rocks, it's fun to go back to previous areas to discover new secrets. Should you perish, you do have unlimited continues, which lets you restart with all your items, but you must begin back at the mouth of the valley every time. Fortunately, it doesn't take too long to retrace your steps with all the shortcuts that become available. The satisfying ending is also well worth the investment in time. Sadly, it seemingly sets up a sequel that to my knowledge never got made, outside of a bizarre spin-off known as Super Cooks on the MSX2. If anything, Golvellius' spirit was carried on by Compile's later NES cult classic The Guardian Legend, which further refined the combination of top-down exploration and intense shooting action. This card also wouldn't be the last attempt by Sega to tap into Zelda's popularity, as they would publish another top-down adventure 3 years later, only this one is a blatant copy of Zelda 1 with very little originality. We'll delve more into that cartridge should we get to 1991. So when all is said and done, Golvellius isn't going to knock its more accomplished Nintendo counterpart from the top of the action-adventure heap due to a few annoyances, and it's not going to appeal to everyone. But even with all its warts and lack of replayability, it's still a top-notch and enjoyable cartridge that does a very solid job of giving Sega gamers their own Zelda-esque experience while adding its own twist on the formula. And it serves as yet another tease of the type of games the Master System was capable of, outside of arcade ports. Those searching for a new type of adventure should definitely give this quest a shot.